Hey everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my breakdown of the Sundance Film Festival 2023. This is the second year I have been able to attend the Sundance Film Festival in full. I also attended it in early 2021 when I went to watch Judas and the Black Messiah's premiere then, but that was only one film. Last year I saw a bunch of films. This year I saw even more. It's such an exciting time for film festivals. Of course, it's very unfortunate that COVID shut the whole world down, but the only glimmer of light it brought was the fact that now a lot of these film festivals are having virtual options or options for more accessibility. Some titles, of course, were not shown virtually this year because they did reopen the public Sundance Film Festival in Utah. They were allowing guests in person this year, so I understand the reasoning behind keeping some films exclusive to the festival itself, but it was still awesome to have so many films and so many great films accessible virtually. Years ago, you weren't able to see any film, so I think this is a huge win for film fans and film viewers. But I'm here to tell you what my 5 best of the fest films are, and also give a few honorable mentions and some movies that maybe were dishonorable mentions. Because I think in order to acknowledge what the best of the fest is, you also have to acknowledge some of the weaker points as well. Let's start though with some of the honorable mentions, some films that came very, very close to making my best of the fest but didn't quite hit that mark. One of them is the Grand Prize jury winner for documentaries. The film that won the Grand Jury Prize for U.S. documentary was Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni Project. It is a documentary directed by Joe Brewster and Michelle Stevenson. These are two documentarians I have never seen their previous work, and this is a subject, Nikki Giovanni, that I didn't know any of her previous work either. So this was a really enlightening and eye-opening documentary. It was great to hear about this poet's lifestyle while also seeing a visual representation of what her life is like as well. This documentary feels like it paired really nicely with the type of person Nikki Giovanni is, and this documentary made me want to learn more about her life. And I think that's the main purpose of a documentary, is to make you want to know more about its subject. So in that sense, I think it definitely won me over in that regard. The U.S. Grand Jury Prize winner for narrative films from the U.S., which is essentially the Best Picture prize at the Sundance Film Festival. We've seen it go to some pretty renowned films over the years. This year it went to a film by A.V. Rockwell titled 1001. And this film basically follows the life of this mother, Inez, who gets out of jail and basically takes her son Terry out of foster care, her 6-year-old child Terry. And you start to see them as Terry's a younger child, but also as Terry grows up and as he goes to high school. You start to see this relationship between mother and son, and then also the father when he comes into the picture as well. This is a very interesting story centered around 1990s New York City. It has a great sense of atmosphere. It did feel a little bit similar to some other films of its kind, and while I didn't think that was too much of a negative, it also held me back from truly loving the film until its final act. The final act is when everything kind of comes full circle. There is a twist that is revealed that I'm not going to say here because I think this movie is built on that twist. And the twist that comes in the third act is a heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching twist, and the way it's delivered is so powerful and so palpable. It literally made me rate this 2 stars higher than I would have otherwise. I was really swept up by this film, by its ending. Its third act is so strong. There's such great acting from Tiana Taylor and Josiah Cross, who play this mother and son relationship. I was blown away by the ending, so much so that now I want to go back and watch this film with all the context of the ending in perspective to watch the whole film, and I think it'll play a lot stronger on rewatch. But because I didn't really feel that sense of amazement until that third act, it keeps it slightly out of my top 5. Another film that was very interesting, to say the least, was Cat Person, a film by Susanna Vogel. This film stars Nicholas Braun from Succession, as well as Emilia Jones, who was in a really big Sundance hit, Coda, just a few years ago. This film follows this awkward relationship between a college student and an older man. This is not by any means your Licorice Pizza or Red Rocket. You know, it's not an illegal relationship, but there is a significant age gap. You start to see how their age difference, just in maturity, plays into their relationship. It's a film made to make you feel uncomfortable, and I think that's why a lot of audiences weren't very responsive to this film. But I think the two leads play off the awkwardness really, really well. You're really supposed to cringe at this film, and they do a successful job in making you cringe. Nicholas Braun in particular is just such a great character actor. He really steals every film and show he's in, and I think he's someone we could see end up having a career trajectory like Nicolas Cage, where you can kind of put him in any movie and he's gonna stick out a bit like a sore thumb, but in the best way possible, because he is so so unique, and he has such an interesting vibe, an interesting way of speaking. He is someone that my eye is always drawn to whenever he's in a project. I'm really excited to see his career continue to take off, as well as Emilia Jones, who is doing something completely 180 from her Coda performance. The film does kind of spiral out of control in the third act, and I know that's purposeful for the story it's telling, but I kind of preferred the first two acts where everything is a little bit more awkward. It's living in that space in between sanity and total off the rails craziness, and I think once it goes into the other polar opposite direction and it kind of goes off the rails in that way, I just didn't feel like I was as on board with the film as I was in the lead up to it. But again, I think the atmosphere built in the first two acts is really, really awkward, but in a good way. And I do think these two leads just together, their chemistry and their lack thereof chemistry is really fascinating to see. So I do recommend Cat Person, but I do think it's going to be a film that varies in terms of enjoyment depending on who you are, what type of mood you're in, and what you're in the mood to see. As for some of the films that I was a little bit underwhelmed by at the festival, one of them is Randall Park's directorial debut, Shortcomings. I'm a big fan of Randall Park's work as an actor. We've seen him in the MCU. We saw him as Jim in The Office. I'm a big fan of him as an actor. As a director, I think he's a pretty solid director too. Unfortunately, his film Shortcomings, it falls a bit short, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, because of its script. It is an adaptation of a graphic novel, but for some reason, when translated to the screen, this story just didn't really rope me in as much as I would have liked it to. And I think that's because Justin H. Min's character, Ben Tanaka, Justin H. Min, by the way, is incredible. He played Yang in After Yang. That's maybe where you saw him last, or in The Umbrella Academy, which I haven't watched, but I heard he's great in. He plays a character named Ben, who is probably the most insufferable person you'll ever meet. I think there's a lot to say about a film that has a protagonist that is flawed, that has his issues, but when I think you're supposed to see everything from his lens and you're supposed to kind of take his side, or at least the film wants you to take his side, but he makes it very, very hard to do so, I think, that was a recipe for disaster from the get-go. I wish there was a little bit more redemption to Ben's character earlier on, so that way when he made some mistakes, you're a little bit more forgiving as an audience, rather than consistently from the very get-go recognizing that Ben is a flawed individual, that he is not the type of person anyone should be modeling their life after. But that wasn't even my biggest issue with the film. The issue with the film is that it is labeled as a rom-com, and for me, I think the romantic elements of what it had to say about adult romances was a lot stronger than it was a comedy. And I think for a comedy, I didn't laugh that much, and that's especially disappointing considering there is a lot of great comedic talent in this cast, and of course behind the camera with Randall Park. I was just disappointed overall. It's not a bad movie by any means, but it's one that I was definitely disappointed by. Another film that would be in my dishonorable mentions pile is Run Rabbit Run. This is a film that has already been acquired by Netflix, so clearly Netflix saw something in it, and it's directed by Dana Reed. It's an Australian thriller. I think this film has a problem in setting up so many questions that the audience wants to have answered to them, maybe things involving the character's past, or little details that are kind of dropped but not fully elaborated on, that the audience wants to know more about but then doesn't really get answers to. And it's okay to have questions that remain unanswered in films, but when a lot of the build-up is built around the mystery behind a character's past and why she's acting a certain way, and we never really get the true answer as to why, or the answers that are given are unsatisfying, it really lends to a really bland viewing experience. Though I will say Sarah Snook is good in everything, so if you're a fan of her, you might be a fan of this film. And lastly, in my unhonorable mentions pile is Alice Engert's Bad Behaviour. This is a film that was kind of universally across the board disliked by most people at Sundance. I heard this was one of the only films where there was no applause when the film ended, and all the cast and crew is there in person, so maybe that's a little disrespectful not to applaud. But again, this film I think has a lot of glaring issues. First off, I don't think it knows what film it really wants to be. Does it want to be a thriller? Does it want to be a horror? Does it want to be a comedic kind of dark satire? Does it want to be something dramatic? Does it want to be even an action film? I mean, this deals with stunt performers to an extent. I think the problem is there's so many different tonal shifts throughout this thing, and there's so many different characters and different storylines that don't really mesh until later on in the film, but by the time the stories come together, you've really kind of lost interest in every story on its own. This is one I don't recommend, even though I think Alice Englert has potential as a filmmaker. I mean, her mom is Jane Campion, who is one of the greatest directors working today. I think this film had a little bit of potential that was lost, but I still think the director has potential that she'll hopefully grow on in her future films. It's just for her debut, this one was not the best. But now moving on to my 5 best films of the festival. This is my best of the fest. Starting at number 5, a film that not many people have talked about leaving the festival, and that might be because it is a Lithuanian film, and not many people really seek out Lithuanian films, but I did because the premise sounded interesting, and boy did it deliver, and this is a film called Slow. This is directed by Maria Kavadartse. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name wrong. I apologize if I did, but I was really swept up by the calm and patient nature of Slow. I think Slow, like its title, does take its time, but I think it does it in such a deliberate and purposeful way. This film centers around a dancer named Elena who falls in love with this sign language interpreter, Dovydas. They form this really beautiful bond with one another, but kind of the one elephant in the room with their relationship is the fact that he is asexual. And I think this is one thing that I really applaud the film in doing, is not making a judgment toward asexuality. I don't know anyone personally that is asexual, but I do know some critics that I'm a fan of, some other celebrities I know of that are asexual. I think it's really exciting for them and just for the asexual community to see representation on screen that doesn't portray asexuality as a negative. It doesn't shy away from some of the obstacles that presents in a relationship, but it also never judges the characters either. It never strictly says that asexuality is something that should be shamed or something that should be avoided or something that is taboo. I really appreciated what this director had to say about that, but not just in its representation, but in just the outlook of love and what it means to love. It also dives into realism with relationships and being realistic within relationships and finding ways to navigate differences. I really like this film, and I think it's one that is going to stick with me because of how much it embraced that feeling of love, how it also embraced that sense of reality. Even as someone who's not asexual, I still felt and connected with that character and with that relationship on both sides, as someone who is asexual or someone who is dating someone who is asexual, and how you navigate a relationship like that. I was very, very swept up by this film, and I think while the pacing could sometimes get to me, I think the pacing was definitely, like I said, deliberate in creating an overall effect that is, at the end of the day, very enchanting. Moving on to my number 4 film of the festival, a film called Sometimes I Think About Dying by Rachel Lambert. This is also the big return of Daisy Ridley after we saw her in the Star Wars films. We also saw her pop up in Murder on the Orient Express, though I don't think many people really still talk about that movie, but it's really exciting, first off, to see Daisy Ridley get more roles and get roles that are so different from Ray. Ray is this really powerful, strong, optimistic person, and in this film, Sometimes I Think About Dying, Daisy Ridley plays a character named Fran who is very introverted. She's very quiet, but she doesn't really feel embarrassed by her introvertedness. She kind of owns it and makes it a part of her, and I think that's also something that's very refreshing to see in film. Like I talked about with asexuality and Slow, this film doesn't pass judgments on people who are suffering from depression or who have anxiety or who just like quiet in their lives. I'm someone who's introverted. I really do enjoy sitting alone sometimes and just being with silence. I know some people aren't that way, but I really related to Fran in this film because Fran, she spends a lot of her day pondering and a lot of the time just kind of basking in silence. But the film never really makes it out to be a particularly embarrassing or negative thing. Yes, there are certain obstacles she faces in her life, as do a lot of introverts, especially because she works in a workplace where everyone is extroverted and everyone around her is talking constantly and trying to crack jokes with one another, and she's someone who just isn't about that. She's not the type of person to just be cracking jokes and talking it up, making small talk, and the film dives into that and how that isn't necessarily something to judge other people on, and it's also not something to be embarrassed by, but something that just is. And I really like this film because of that. I felt very seen in this film. This film, contrary to what its title may suggest, isn't a very negative film. In fact, it's a very optimistic film because this centers around Fran meeting someone in her workplace and finding a connection and a spark with that person, and you start to see again an odd couple-like relationship, someone who is introverted and extroverted coming together and finding this beautiful harmony. And I think that's a theme I've seen with a lot of these films at Sundance this year, is the idea of these opposites attracting, and neither side is in the wrong. And I really like that about this film. It's a film that's quiet, it's quaint, it's peaceful, it's soft, it's delicate, but I think films like that are needed next to the larger bombastic blockbusters. You got to have those more quiet pieces centered around moods and vibes, and I think this is one of those films that is going to be great for a rainy day when you just need to kind of chill and be with a film. Yes, it has some dramatic moments because, not everything is easy for Fran, but in the end, it is a very optimistic look into the headspace of someone who is an introvert and who sometimes navigates life a little bit differently than most, and I found that really, really refreshing to see. Moving on to number 3, we have a film that has also been picked up by Netflix as of recent, and that is Chloe DeMont's Fair Play. Fair Play is a really, really slick Wall Street thriller. It has a really classic vibe to it. It doesn't feel like something that's too revolutionary in presentation, but it's still gripping in every single scene. It's about this couple played by Phoebe Dynevor from Bridgerton and Alden Ehrenreich, who you may recognize as Han Solo in Solo: A Star Wars Story. And you're introduced to them as a couple, but then you realize that when they go to work on Wall Street, they pretend like they're not in a relationship to their peers. At work, it's a strictly working relationship, and you start to see when one of them gets promoted, you start to see their worlds kind of collide, and you start to see how they bring some of their relationship issues into the workplace, and they bring some of the workplace issues into their relationship at home. And it's a really, really spicy, sizzling, really erotic, but also super dark and like gritty thriller. Like, this really was exciting to watch. This couple is, in a very good place at the beginning and just unravels as this film goes along, and just to watch that build up, it's like a pressure cooker. It's, you put these two people in a box and you turn the heat up and you just watch what happens, and it's so addicting to watch. I do think, like I alluded to with Cat Person, this kind of goes a little off the rails in the third act, to where it feels like it could have ended a little bit sooner than it did. It maybe went on 15 minutes too long, but then it sticks a landing with a great final scene. This is a film that I don't want to spoil for anyone, but it is going to be a treat when it hits Netflix. I think a lot of people are going to love it, and the two performances are two of the best I saw the whole festival. At number 2, we have a film that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is Theater Camp. As a theater kid, this is all I could have asked for. Directed by Molly Gordon and Nick Lieberman, and also written by Ben Platt and Noah Galvin, in addition to the two directors. This is an ode to the odd kid who found himself at a theater camp, and that is me. I am the odd kid, didn't have too many friends growing up, went to theater camp and found a family through doing theater camp, and then went on to do theater in high school, in middle school, and found an even bigger family. Theater is a place where you can build a family outside of your regular family. I called my theater camp my home away from home. It's just this bond you have when you're all there to do the same thing, to strive toward a larger goal, but to also do it on low budget with not much time. People are changing roles. People are learning their lines the day of the show. I mean, this doesn't hide away from all the craziness that goes on in theater camp also, but as someone who went through theater camp and as someone who had this as an ingrained part of their childhood, I related to all that. I related to the hijinks. I related to the diva nature of some of the teachers and students, and just the idea that there are such large personalities, but at the end, we all still love each other because it's this one big dysfunctional family. This is filmed like a documentary, kind of like Waiting for Guffman. This very much reminded me of Waiting for Guffman, but the difference here is that instead of adults doing a show, it is kids doing a show. And I think that makes it all the more charming because you have these kids who are genuinely some of the most talented kids ever that I've seen in a movie, performing these songs and acting and doing all these amazing theater things. It's just so heartwarming to see. This is a great comedy. There's so much great comedy in it, but at its core, it's this really sentimental love letter to theater camps and to teachers and educators and people who continue to strive to keep something alive, even when the world is trying to push against it. We just came through a pandemic. It's really hard to do theater from home. Theater is something that requires the live experience to be fully felt. And, this film felt like an ode to the people who really work hard to make theater happen and make theater success. And it's made by people who have continued to strive toward bringing theater and bringing enjoyment to people's lives. I mean, Ben Platt won a Tony Award for playing Evan Hansen on Broadway. He's going to be in a revival of Parade on Broadway very soon. Molly Gordon, Nick Lieberman, Noah Galvin, all these people really have a love for this art form, not just for film, but for theater, and it really shows. And all these kids are so talented. It has one of the greatest third act tearjerker moments when all these kids get together and start singing about their love for camp. It reminded me of my personal camp, the Panetta Conservatory. How we gonna pay? How we gonna pay? How we gonna pay last year's if you're watching Pineda alums, I love you. My heart is with you. Juan, Val, Fausto, and our dearly departed angel in heaven, Trish, our 4 camp counselors who ran that camp and gave myself and so many other friends such amazing memories. This film felt like a love letter, not just to me, but to all of you. And I hope if any of my camp alums are watching this, that they go check this out and remember all those amazing memories I had and that we all had at the Pineda Conservatory. Or if you're watching this and you didn't go to a theater camp, but you still felt that sense of community through a different type of activity, through sports or just through school, or just that idea of coming together, I think you're really going to connect with this film. There's a little bit of inside jokes that maybe not everyone will connect to, but I hope they'll connect to the overall sentiment of it, because I think it is one of the most touching films I've seen at any Sundance festival. But my number one film is a documentary by Madeline Gavin, and that is Beyond Utopia. This is a film that was not on my radar, but so many people were buzzing about it, and it ended up winning the Audience Award for documentaries, and this film blew me away. I mean, this film is one of those films that you can't believe even exists because of the footage they're getting, because this is a film about North Korean refugees. This is about a family who is trying to escape North Korea and get to South Korea, but the big trouble is they can't just cross the border from North to South Korea. They have to cross the border from North Korea to China, and then they have to travel through Vietnam, through the jungles of Laos overnight. They have to literally walk through a jungle in Laos and then get to Thailand, where they can finally fly over to South Korea. And this film is such a harrowing and gut-wrenching experience. You know, you're seeing the footage of these people escaping North Korea. It's some of the most amazing footage you'll ever see. It really gives you a perspective on a life that is so difficult. You know, we get stories from refugees that have made it to South Korea, but we also get stories from their families that have lost people because they've tried to cross the borders. And, you know, the big thing is if you get caught crossing the border, you're sent back to North Korea to basically be executed. And that's also terrifying. And it really puts a different perspective in your mind as a viewer watching it of, you know, privilege and what it means to live in a place where you don't have to worry about your life every single day at the hands of the government. And some people in our country even still deal with that. And it's really heartbreaking to see, but it's just a great reminder that you can't take life for granted. And if you have that privilege, use your privilege and also acknowledge your privilege, because this is a film that totally opened my mind to so many more avenues and possibilities and really showed me what I'm grateful for, and also made me admire so many countless individuals, not just those escaping North Korea and those taking that journey, but those who are helping with the journey and risking their own lives to help others. It is one of the most amazing, not just documentaries, but amazing films I've seen in the last few years. It is without a doubt going to be in my best of the year list when this whole year passes. I think this is going to be, if not at the tippity top, then definitely in like the top 10 or 20 films I will have seen all year. It's just one of those films that was gripping from the very first shot to the very last. And the biggest thing that I have to stress is the fact that this is all authentic footage. They didn't recreate anything. There was nothing that was done for a reenactment, for any sort of extra footage that they didn't get. They got all the footage, and that makes it even scarier. The fact that they had to take cameras with them on their journey because they wanted to document this, to show the world, hey, this is what we go through, and this cannot be accepted. Like, this is awful that people have to do this. And wow, like this documentary really left me speechless. So I really hope you all check out Beyond Utopia whenever it's available. Those are my 5 best films at the Sundance Film Festival. And one thing that I also wanted to mention is that every single one of these films was either directed or co-directed by women. And I think that's really awesome to see as well, that Sundance is not only welcoming so many different diverse voices, but also so many women filmmakers' voices. And I hope some of these directors are in the conversation for Best Director come next year, or at least their films are recognized. Like, I really hope Beyond Utopia wins that documentary Oscar. I don't see any other documentary coming close to it this year, but if it does, then we're in for a great year of documentaries. And I also think those other films, Theater Camp, which is co-directed by Molly Gordon, Fair Play, Sometimes I think about Dying Slow, even 1001. All these films are so well directed. I think there's a lot to learn from looking at films from all different types of voices, and it just so happens that the films that spoke most to me were all directed by women, which was a really cool thing to realize after putting together this list. It was something I totally realized in retrospect. I didn't even mean for that to happen, but it's really awesome to see when looking back at this list. So that's my list, as I said. If you saw any films at Sundance, let me know what your favorites were. If you hadn't seen any films at Sundance and you want to check these out, let me know which ones I most excited you about. So let me know which ones you're excited to check out down below. Or if there are any other films, non-Sundance related, that you want me to check out and review, let me know down below. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that jazz. It really helps this channel grow, and I'm really appreciative to see all the growth. And as always, you can check out this review and other reviews on the Dyl Pickle Podcast. I am 4 weeks deep into my Sight and Sound podcast, where I'm looking at every single film on the Sight and Sound poll. I'm going to be talking about Once Upon a Time in the West this week, the Sergio Leone film, so I highly recommend you check that out. And keep watching the channel. We got some exciting stuff coming, especially with Oscars coming up soon, so it'll be a lot of fun to talk about that as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.